Hi, everybody, and welcome to another webinar brought to you by the Casino Guru News. Today, we are going to discuss a topic of utmost importance, one that resonates deeply within the gambling industry: customer care and gambling harm prevention. In an age where the landscape of gambling is rapidly evolving and the responsibility of both regulators and gambling companies are expanding, it's important to acknowledge the shifts in the approach to regulation. We've witnessed a surge in efforts to minimize harm to players, a crucial aspect in our industry's ethical and social commitment. So, let me pose a fundamental question. How do we define customer care and gambling harm prevention in this ever evolving landscape? And do we truly understand what they are and what it means to implement them in the gambling industry? To answer these and many other questions, we have invited here today great experts in their fields, including Kevin O'Neill, General Manager at the Responsible Gaming Foundation. Welcome, Kevin. How are you today?
Good morning to all. I'm feeling great. It's a great day outside, and I'm in a great mood today, especially being in such great company.
Thank you. David Richardson, Head of Strategic Partnerships at Better Change. Hi, David. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And to echo Kevin's thoughts, glad to be here and looking forward to the chat.
And Maris Catania, researcher and responsible gaming consultant and at Integrity Analytics. It's great to have you here, Maris. How are you?
I'm good. It's morning. I'm not a morning person, but I'm good.
Well, me neither. So there's two of us. My name is Denisa, and I will be your moderator today, just making sure the things run smoothly. But we're here to hear from you guys. So as I've said to you before, feel free to pitch in to the discussion. I will be looking forward to that. So without further ado, I guess we can begin with the very first question. Customer care. Customer care has become such an important topic to regulators and operators over the past few years. In the light of this, I think we should ask ourselves, what is the first thing that needs to change today to speak of an improved level of customer care and gambling harm prevention? What would be that one positive effect that would appease all parties involved? Or do we need to face the reality that no such unicorn solution exists? Kevin, could you please start?
Well, my take on this is that the relationship between regulation and customer care is somewhat complex. It's still somewhat complex, yet it's symbiotic. One cannot be without the other. But I don't think that we should be relying solely on regulation, because I feel that it stifles the innovation and looking for innovative practices, if you know what I mean. So, like, I would think that introducing something like the construct of business ethics to every level of the operation in gaming companies would permeate that organization's culture, and it ensures that the leaders and staff in that particular organization are sensitized towards how they should act when no one's looking. This goes completely beyond user experience and customer care. Business ethics can be a significant differentiator, I believe, in an operation.
Absolutely. Dave, would you agree?
Yeah, I'd agree with virtually everything what Kevin's just said there. And I think too often we're probably guilty of confusing customer care with looking after problem gamblers. They're very, very different things. From an operator point of view, customer care is just as important for the commercial journey as it is to protect against harm. So when we're talking customer care, it's obviously a very big question what you posed at the start, which is the whole idea of it. But I think it's impossible almost to answer that. And there is not going to be one thing which we can change around customer care which solves people who are getting to harm from gambling. But what I do think we can do is from a commercial point of view as an operator, as much as anything, we should be looking at things now about what's going to be attractive to the next generation of our customers. How are we going to keep our customers and the lifetime value of them customers gambling with us for the duration of their gambling life, if you like, from when they're adults. And a lot of that is going to be about how you communicate with them in a customer care sense. It's not just going to be around about free spins and free offers, which it maybe was previously. But I think people are going to want to see that their operator of choice is looking after them, they communicate to them on a personal level, and they want to be seen as looking after them way before they experience signs of potential gambling harm.
Maris, what's your take on this?
I am going to take a point from each that really resonated with me. When Kevin mentioned the business ethics, and I think it's such an important concept, especially when discussing, for example, like if we look at operators, if you are an account manager, your bonus is based on how much money you make from people. And that's not really, it doesn't reflect the business ethics. That's why it resonated with me. I think if there is like aligned KPIs, that doesn't need to be more on safer gambling, but at least more on gambling not being exploitative and again ethical. So it really stuck with me. And then what Dave mentioned around the future generation, I find that the gambling industry does speak a lot about innovation, but I don't see any innovation, to be totally honest. Like most of the websites are the same, the offers are the same. If I had to look at what type of offers were offered 5 years ago, they're still the same stuff that you always see. Whereas you have the young generation is so different. And even us, like the internet took over a lot of our stuff. And I don't think the industry is ready for this. And if they had to, even how they communicate their brand, it will make such a big impact. And from that perspective, business ethics and ethical practice is all that they should focus on, in my opinion.
I think Maris makes a really good point there about innovation. We talk about innovation a lot, we talk about collaboration a lot, but ultimately we don't see loads of it. And I think that's where it's a really good segue to bring in the regulators. If I was an operator in the UK, I would be scared to innovate because I get a fine or I get a punishment or I get bad press. So I think that's where the regulators have got to work with the industry more. And it's not a case of the regulator bashing. It's very easy to do that. And every conference you go to, there's some degree of that. I don't think that's the way forward. I think the way forward is actually to try and get people working together. And I've had many conversations with operators and regulators alike over the last 18 months. And there is a fear factor of trying to do things differently, because if you do it differently and it goes wrong, you get bad press or fine, where the whole nature of innovation should allow for things to fail. And if a fear of failure just doesn't really work if you're trying to bring innovation into that culture.
I've seen innovation from the industry, but it's usually really bad. So you have seen, because I understand regulators maybe would be a bit afraid, but most of the time the operators still manage to bypass some regulations. But like if you see how many non-GameStop casinos are there, how many investment in crypto payments are there, usually innovation is very much positively correlated with exploiting customers rather than trying to make their business better. That's what really annoys me, though.
Great.
I'm a morning person, so you will get some negative points from me.
It's okay. We'll play devil's advocate then. Okay, great point. My question is, though, when we speak of responsible gambling and harm prevention, do you think the stakeholders and legislators should try and find a balance between economic viability and consumer safety, or should consumer safety be an absolute in the sense that it simply must always come first? What's your stance, David?
Consumer safety should always come first, as in no one should do anything which they think can cause harm to people. But, and it's quite a big but, the whole nature of gambling is there is degrees of jeopardy in gambling. And without that jeopardy, people aren't going to gamble. So it's trying to find the balance between keeping the product exciting and interesting. And I think the key word, what Maris said, is exploitative. And it's very obvious now, and you can see when there's exploitative practices and exploitative offers as such. I think that's the part which lets the industry down. I think if you try and over-regulate and for the want of a better word, but too much focus on the customer care actually ruins the product which people are interested in the first place. And a great example at the moment with what's going on in the UK, something I'm really passionate about, is within horse racing. And the affordability checks within horse racing have got there's a real risk at the moment that they could damage the industry beyond repair to a point where it's no longer an industry. And that is in the name of looking after the consumer. And it's kind of a bit of a blanket approach, which is a risk of actually ruining a huge part of the industry in the UK. So to answer your question, customer care, of course, we should look after everyone. No one wants to see harm. It goes without saying. But I do think there's a fine line between going too far and ruining what the most of the people enjoy in the first place.
I think that different stakeholders have obviously different perspectives on this. I mean, the ideal approach can depend on various factors. There's cultural attitudes and existing legislation. For people involved in responsible gambling, we consider consumer safety as the absolute because of the social cost involved, and it's very important. But circling back to what we said about business ethics, it ensures that this balance between obviously profits and safety is somewhat reached in terms of consumer safety. I mean.
I think it depends on, we tend to look into safer gambling, responsible gambling as a whole, whereas there are so many different aspects. And what I don't understand is, maybe because I'm a researcher, so I'm a bit biased in that opinion, but with online gambling, we have objective data, we have thousands of records, but still I sometimes feel that regulators don't use that type of data. You can really understand better the consumer behavior. When you go with blanket limits, it can really hurt not just the business, but also the consumer. So to give an example, during COVID in Sweden, there was, it was obligated that all the gambling companies had to impose, it was around 600 euro, 5,000 krona per week, only on casino. And obviously, when you see that from a commercial perspective, a lot of the commercial people were like, oh no, this is going to ruin our high-end customers. Me, from a safer gambling perspective, I was thinking, this is too high. And the regulator here is saying that sports betting is safe because it's only imposed on casino. So, and we know that product risk is different. The same with some UK discussions on making games slower. People can enjoy playing fast games. It doesn't mean that they have problems. So if you alter the product in a way that it's going to not make it attractive, yes, you're going to have people who will go somewhere else, which might not offer the same consumer protection. But then when it comes to the economic side of things, if we had more investment, for example, in markers of harm, where you can help people proactively, instead of, or maybe better, safer gambling tools, to invest in a way that can be still personalized and protective, but not to ruin the customer journey.
I think what Maris is saying is the dynamic approach to this. It's another perspective. It's not a static decision. It should be continuously evaluated as more data obviously becomes available. The impact of various harm minimization strategies, adjustments can be made to find the optimal balance between obviously consumer safety and economic viability, in my opinion.
And we always see safer gambling journey as something which is negative, like, affordability checks. But like if you go, I like to use this example a lot. If I go to the airport, one of the things I hate is the security check because it's always easy. You have to get out of your stuff. But if you're given the choice of not doing it, you wouldn't accept it because you still agree with it. But what if, I'm not talking about the Malta airport for sure, but like some airports, you don't need to put out your liquids anymore. You don't need to put out your laptop anymore. So they made a pain journey into something which is just easy and you feel secure, but at the same time, it's a seamless activity.
That's a great point also. Um, if you allow me, I would like maybe a shift the perspective more onto you, because all of you have committed a significant part of your career to not just insisting of changing the industry for the better, but have actively been working to bring about this change. Can you tell us, in your experience, what are the things that are still not fully addressed? For example, are lawmakers and businesses aware of the psychological aspect of gambling harm, what causes it, and whether the existing tools, such as the self exclusion options, are effective enough? Kevin, would you mind starting on that?
Well, the awareness of psychological aspects of gambling among lawmakers and businesses obviously varies significantly depending on jurisdiction, research, and obviously if there's any advocacy efforts in place. Um, I believe that legislative efforts must include expert consultation. These obviously are the experts, are the ones that offer a depth of understanding of the psychological impact of gambling. And obviously, access to psychological counseling and community programs are crucial. Yet, unfortunately, these resources are not always readily available in the various jurisdictions.
Yeah, I'd add to that saying that I feel like all the pieces are there somewhere. We've got some fantastic experts who've got great experience in the industry. We've got research hubs all over the world now based in top universities. We've got people within operators, which is the crucial part, who are working specifically on this, which is a big change from a decade ago, say. But it's almost joining all that up now to find the solution. And I think we're at that period of change where the industry is still trying to work out the best way to take all the great information we've got and use it. So I think that answers the question slightly. Yeah, we've got everything there, but it's just not joined together. And I bring the regulators into that as well. I don't feel like sometimes the regulators are fully understanding the operators' business, and I don't feel the operators understand the regulators' point of view. It should be a really harmonious relationship, like it is in a lot of industries. But it seems to be a lot of the clash at a lot of points, major points, which kind of prevent moving forward, I think.
Maris, do you have anything to add?
Well, I'm just going to echo what they said. I always used to advocate that you should have 3 focus areas with these things: the academic, the community, and the customer as an operator. You rely on academic because it's objective data and you can have, like proper stats showing, and the community, as Kevin mentioned, for example. So treatment centers, lived experience, affected others. And then those groups should be actually quite hand in hand with the regulator.
Just to add to that point, which really kind of grinds on me a little bit, a bugbear of the whole picture at the moment is how the gambling industry is perceived from the outside world, which makes change very, very difficult because there's a huge stigma around it. I've been doing a bit of work recently about how people who work in the industry feel about working in the industry, and it's quite sad, really, that a lot of people almost they feel a bit ashamed and don't like to admit they work in the industry, where it's a fantastic industry, which is really positive, and there's so many people doing some amazing work from all sides of the industry, from the innovation, the marketing, the graphics, the design, to the safer gambling. But I do feel like the industry, the bugbear I'm getting to is that when there's anything comes up in gambling in the mainstream media, it's always very negative, and it's always smaller groups, prohibitionist groups, really, who have a loud voice. And I'd love at some point to have a little bit of balance in that in the mainstream media. I only have to watch the television recently when the football players got in trouble for gambling on football. where really that is a professional conduct issue, a lot of it with their sport and their governing body. But it got made out into a huge thing about gambling addiction within the sport, with actually based on nothing, based on no evidence. And there was no one to really counter that. And I sometimes wonder why the industry can't counter that and give a bit of balance to the viewers. I'd love to see some operators or see some regulators actually stick up for gambling in the want of a better word, and talk about the positive things that go on, talk about all the good things that happen. Because I feel like the public have a very, very negative perception of the industry as a whole.
I think that's all the industry's fault. It's still one of the worst businesses I've seen, to be fair.
Do you think the industry could and should do something about that, Maurice?
They should do something about it, but a lot of companies don't. I still remember in 2017, not too long ago, when we did a study where we did like a mystery shopping exercise. And at the time, they were tailored for Maltese people. So at the time, the MGA did write in the legislation that you should have a responsible gambling page. Well and good. 88% of all the websites we evaluated had commercial information on the RG page. So you literally have a page which should be dedicated to responsible gambling. You had pop-ups to claim a bonus. Like, obviously, the business will be seen bad. There's so much reliance sometimes on VIPs. I was teaching at the university here, and the students were from the Maldives, for example. And they told me, like, oh, I can't speak about online gambling because it's banned in our country. I did a VPN, IP Maldives, and I could play immediately on so many online gambling operators.
Yeah.
So I understand, yes, especially in the UK, some of the lived experience might have a bigger voice, but I think they have quite a bit of reason why they should be pissed off. Because a lot of the gambling industry did shoot themselves in the foot.
I fully agree. And in 2017, I wasn't working in the industry then, but I would maybe hopefully like to think things have changed quite a bit since then in the last six and a bit years. But I completely agree. I think that's what I'm saying. A lot of the industry lets itself down there, but there are a lot of people within the industry, within the operators as well, who almost I feel have got a responsibility to kind of fight back a little bit. And I think there are people who have got that positive attitude to it, but almost can't say anything because they've been let down by colleagues, shall we say, within the industry.
They have that, but like just 2 years ago, I was going to give a presentation on RG, and the speaker before me, who is a very reputable company, said, "I don't know why people make such a fuss. It's less than 2% of the population that have a gambling disorder." Like, I wanted to hit him just there and then. And you see a lot of passion from the people working in the RG department, but you don't always see that from CEOs or from execs, because they are pushing for money. They don't sometimes care where the money is coming from. And even with regulation, as long as the regulator doesn't find out, there is that ethic. That's why the business ethics perspective that Kevin mentioned, I think, resonated with me, because it would be like, even with Kindred, when I was working with Kindred, when the Journey to Zero came out, it was Henrik who was the voice of it.
Yes.
And that made such a shift, because I had the CEO, backing me up.
Yeah.
But I know people who were fired from their job because they sent out a large email.
And that is why I place the emphasis that ethical, business ethics must be on every level of the organization, of the company, from the top to the bottom and back up, because it makes all the difference. It's useless having certain standards, with the customer care people, the frontliners. It must really permeate the culture of an operator, I believe.
Yeah. I'm very much, I think I work for the industry, but I'm still quite anti-gambling sometimes. but I know like one of these so-called prohibitionists used to really explain it well for me. He used to say, "I'm not anti-gambling, I'm anti-exploitative gambling."
Yes.
And I think sometimes the
I
method
can't argue with that.
Makes sense.
Wow.
Makes sense.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
We
I think
absolutely
what you said-
agree. Yeah, we absolutely.
I think that the gap is closing just from a positive aspect. And I totally agree with what Maurice has said. It's so sad when people are fighting with an organisation that goes higher up and they're getting nowhere with it. But I do think that gap is closing from the people I'm speaking to in the industry. I think they've got the ear of the C-suite more and the CEO more within a safer, responsible gambling aspect. And I do think that is possibly putting a commercial aspect on that as well.
And it shows because even for us as a foundation, we are being contacted by various operators who want simply to do the right thing. And that's very, very encouraging to see that. Very encouraging.
Mm-hmm. No, we have seen a shift. When I started in 2011, I think I remember we had this meeting, all the RG managers at the time, and we were 4 people. Now you have conferences, you have more discussions. I still think there's so much more that can be done.
There's always much more than can be done. And, we're starting by ourselves, so we're here. Okay, we touched actually 2 things that I would really like to talk about. The first one was the stigma around gambling and the business. David, you said that the stigma is pretty much still there and that it's, that the gambling industry doesn't quite deserve it. And Marie said that it shoots itself in foot, pretty much. And but we can all agree practically that the stigma is still there. And do you think that people still look more negatively upon people who fall victim to problem gambling rather than looking negatively and kind of strictly on the business that, allowed it to happen? Maurice, could you start, please?
I think it's a mix as well, depending on who you're asking. You see it a lot with someone who's going, like, who just fell into gambling disorder. There will be a certain level of anger, and rightfully so at times, because I've had cases where, a customer might say, I'm addicted, and a bonus is offered. So obviously that will cause some more tension. If we're discussing marketing, if you are impacted by gambling, for example, your husband had a gambling disorder, you start realizing how affluent marketing is. So it can be a certain level the responsibility of the operators as well. I think the biggest concern I would have around shame and stigma would be anything that would stop people from going for help, because then you have a downward spiral. So if you have someone who has a gambling disorder, online gambling is even worse because it's a hidden addiction. So you might have people who might be developing this problem. There's not enough awareness. There's a lot of stigma around it, shame. So they don't go for help and the problem might get too much. So I think from that perspective, that stigma really worries me. From a public perception, yeah, there should be more, but it's more around the gambling, like the one who is going through the gambling disorder, that concerns me, and the affected others.
I worry about stigma for the fact, obviously, that it may influence also when it comes to research. I believe you would agree to this, Marius, that many people who suffer from problem gambling may not report it, obviously, because of the social stigma attached to it. Obviously it makes it different to get accurate numbers. So I think it bears a very significant. There's a very significant bearing on even research, I believe,
and even researchers, because the fact that, for example, I work within the industry and I do research with the industry, I'm sometimes looked into like corrupted or doing these things in order to, but like when you publish, there's so many procedures, but still they see it in that way, and it's very hard to destroy that.
What Maurice said about the stigma creating a fear factor of getting help is the hugely worrying part. And I think the only example I've spoken about this before, I think it's probably worldwide, but I'm speaking more from a UK perspective, is when we talk about men's mental health. I would say 10 years ago, it was something which I wouldn't be happy to speak to my brother, friends, family about if I had any sort of issues with my mental health. I would never think about going to the doctors because you'd worry about how it'd impact be on my record. It could affect it. And I think I've done a really, really good job in the UK. And I say I'm live in the UK, so I'm basing it on. But so much talk about it in the UK, and so many people have celebrities and people who have got some sort of public standing talking about mental health, coming out with their stories, making it feel like it's really natural to talk about it now, where I can honestly say if I ever felt like that, I'd quite happily speak to friends, family, go to seek professional help about it, where I probably wouldn't have done 10 years ago. And I think that is due to the stigma being broken down. And I fear that in gambling, we've got this stigma where if people have got a problem with it, it almost feels a little bit of a dirty confession to make that you may be addicted to gambling, where we need to get away from that, because the support services out there are incredible. And there's so many options for people at different levels of what support they need now, that is actually, we should be encouraging people to talk about it more, if anything.
That underlines obviously the importance of awareness, creating awareness, because we all know that the stigma obviously may lead to other serious situations, obviously, such as suicide, and that is something obviously that we are addressing as a foundation as well. It's important that we take away the stigma as much as possible, so people can be more free through awareness campaigns and education campaigns, where people are encouraged to speak and seek help.
I think it's a really good point to mention education as well, because with gambling advertising, there's an over-glamorizing effect of gambling, which is understandable because you're selling a product. But then you have like the RGF, they do you do the educational programs.
Yes.
So at least there is some sort of awareness. Listen, you have on one side, this glamorizing gambling, and some people might think, yeah, if I gamble, I'm going to win. But when you have education saying, like, listen, there are odds in place, there are certain probabilities, I think that is really helpful as well.
Yeah, that was my point as well, that it seems like similar to the mental health. The more we talk about it, the more we educate ourselves, and the more things are starting to seem to be going to the right direction, I mean. So the education is probably a good place where to stop this question and kind of move on, because the second thing that caught my eye was that I think we can all agree that despite the reportedly small percentage, Maurice, you said 2% of people are impacted by problem gambling, and it seems small relative to the overall population of gamblers, but the consequences of problem gambling, we can say, that are very significant. It can be a financial ruin and relationships ruined and much, much worse. And my question is that, can we really say that it's a small number that suffers from problem gambling? Have we reached a point where the data we collected on this matter is 100% accurate? Maybe. Maris, could you start?
There are so many issues with that research, to be fair. For example, the prevalence survey, so the AGBA did a study with Margaret Curran where they looked into all the prevalence surveys that are done across Europe, and almost all countries use a different self-assessment test. So you can't really come for some reason, because some use PGSI, the other would use CPGI, the other one would use LIBET. Just there should be a standard approach, and that's it, in my opinion. There's always the impact of the social desirability effect. People not always will tell the truth when they answer questions. I think in some situations like Malta, it might be even more challenging, because we're a small country. We don't like to, we're very aware, don't tell your neighbor what you're doing, so there might be even issues like that. And there's not enough focus on affected others. So even if the percentage is small, you always have so many people who are impacted. So I always joke, for example, being a Maltese, I have big family. So if I had to have a gambling addiction, I would probably have increased the percentage myself by 1 or 2%. because it's so easy to impact others. So you impact your job, your family, all responsibilities.
I believe that, I mean, while the reported percentages, we just finished a survey for 2022, actually, which it will be published shortly. They suggest only a very small fraction. It is the same all over Europe, basically. A small fraction of the population is affected, but obviously the consequences for these individuals and their families, like Mars said, is devastating. So I believe that there is, apart from the stigma, like I said earlier on, there's underreporting that even affects, I mean, people might not know that they have a problem. Okay, there's that as well, that they would not know they have a gambling problem yet. So, and obviously there are other methodological limitations. It's the way, obviously, questions for research are framed. Obviously, they will impact the results of such research. And obviously, there are regional variations as well. They vary. You may not capture the various nuances in the different regions. Obviously, I believe that supplementing official data with one's own research and obviously cross-referencing sources of data is of utmost importance, I believe.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think we get hung up on the data a little bit sometimes, and it probably prevents us moving forward. I think that, like Murray said, the data is questionable, to say the least, because people don't want to talk about things like this. And if you've got the people who don't want to talk about it, are actually the people who will probably sway the data one way or the other. But if it's 0.1%, 2%, 3%, 5%, almost what are we aiming for is what I'd look at. And are we aiming to get to 0%? Because it's never going to happen. There's always going to be some people who suffer from gambling-related harm while gambling is around. So, first of all, what are we aiming for in this? What is good? When can we celebrate successes? But that just links, I think, what the important part is actually what we spoke about previously is the education point. So rather than focus on what's the number at the end of a year, where we're getting to, it's what are we doing to try and educate people and help people and make them make the right decisions and help them make the right decisions so they understand it. Because if we're never going to believe the data, we're never going to, and we don't know where we're trying to get to with the data, I think energies could be focused elsewhere.
And maybe that's a stupid question, but what is stopping us from ensuring that consumers are better protected? Is it a matter of legislation, a matter of not enough trained professionals, not enough researchers, or research maybe not good enough, not even sufficient resources going to organizations that are actively involved with tackling the issue? I mean, are the logistics of gambling harm prevention and consumer safety simply too difficult to pull?
One thing to be clear, and I'm not. I sound like I'm really speaking for the operator, and I'm not at all. But when you say what's preventing it, there is a lot of people doing a really good job in it. So I don't think nothing's stopping us completely. We're not backwards in it. There's lots of things which are going really well. I think what's stopping us making even more progress is the question, and rather than what's stopping us doing anything completely, because there's some really good work that's been done in the last 2 years, in the last 3 years.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really important to actually talk about them, because I think talking about that sort of thing actually then breaks down the stigma a little bit as well, what we were talking about before. And we're always a bit reluctant to do that. As far as what's stopping us making any more progress, I've not got an answer for that. There's no thing. I think it's continually grinding away, continually working, innovation, and people like Maris who've worked in the industry, listening to what they say more, the industry listening to what people like Maris say, and the legislators and regulators listening to what the industry talks about. Because I think the only way is to actually bring the industry together to actually make any more progress. Are we at a point now where if we stay as we are, we can't make any more progress? I don't know. Maybe in
certain jurisdictions, the laws aren't robust enough to protect consumers effectively. And even where obviously there are good laws in place, the lack of enforcement, I mean, it undermines completely the effectiveness of such legislation. I mean, online gambling, it makes regulation more complicated. I mean, it's like an international jurisdiction. Obviously, there's the problem of funding. Obviously, there are organizations tasked with consumer protections, which often they operate on very limited budget. So even technological advancements might be a problem because you know, operators may uh, outpace the tools that are available for regulators as well.
Yeah, and if we ever talk about lack of funding in the gambling industry being a problem, there's something seriously wrong, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of funding in the gambling industry. It's a very cash-rich industry. If that's ever a blocker, there's something very wrong with that.
Yeah, I think it's so multifaceted, that question. Because as Kevin mentioned, that you have like different regulators, different requirements. Sometimes I see things and I'm thinking to myself, like there must be something wrong. Who's allowing these things?
Yeah.
Not just online. For example, if I had to, like as I mentioned, I'm Maltese, and even if I look into these little lotto booths that we have, like so much variability now is in place. And last time, like when I went into one of these lotto booths, I saw one of these betting terminals there. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what's happening? Why are we including so many products in? And when I say small lotto booth, it's very small. Like these are little rooms we see all across the country. Or you start seeing betting shops being opened in the lower socioeconomic places. So there are sometimes these really big dissonance approaches. And at the same time, the regulators would really benefit sometimes not to just look at gambling per gambling, but also there are cyber psychology issues at place. There's an overlay sometimes. So for example, last time when I was looking into gaming, I saw that some gaming providers are using almost like gambling products, but because they're gaming, they're not succeeding to do the same thing. It's such a multifaceted approach, and even the money issue. There's so much investment in B2Bs. There's so much investment in the game development. But even if you had to compare the budgets and when you go to the operators, if you compare the budget that is dedicated to marketing compared to the budget that is dedicated to safer gambling, it's so different that I think if the regulator had to go in and ask, can I see those figures, they would be really surprised to see how different it is.
Mars, do you think the lack of trained personnel when it comes to psychological aspects of gambling and the legal aspects of gambling, does it play a part, do you think?
I think so, personally. I think one of the biggest initiatives I had done at Kindred was the invite Lift experience to discuss their experience. That was such a massive change in the company, because working for the industry, you need to have a thick shell as well. And at times, I used to see a lot of customer service agents treating the customers as account numbers, but sometimes not by choice, to protect their mental state. So I think having that humanistic approach, understanding, showing, and we're not talking about people who work in the industry and might develop a problem. Because if you think there's stigma in one way, imagine if you work post, you're going to lose your job, you're going to go through all these things.
Well, I've heard stories of staff actually leaving because they couldn't take it anymore, actually. The obviously the interactions they had with certain clients made them think twice about their future.
And that's where safer gambling can really help. So I remember when I started Markers of Harm in 2012, I looked into abusive communication because that's psychological strain. We used to have at least one a day, and like someone being abusive to you on the phone, it will impact you. When we started looking into chasing losses, so we started approaching people before they get to that stage, there was a reduction. So more people were actually enjoying being part of customer service. But I've had conversations with people who would tell me, like, I had to leave that company because my first week I had to take care of a suicide call without support. And then that's why you have also that shame working in the industry, because these things are still allowed.
It's a really good point. That's probably under addressed at the moment. People in the industry, they're not only are they speaking to the customers, they're exposed to all the marketing on a daily basis. They're exposed to all the brand, the imagery, and everything like that. So it's something which I know a lot of operators do actually look at, but it's probably something which is a whole new sector, isn't it? And like you said, if you've got stigma and you don't work in the industry, the stigma of having a gambling problem when you do work in the industry must be something which you find very difficult to talk about.
Yeah, you hear all these jackpot winners. It's not the first time you would get an email saying like, oh, this guy won the jackpot. But you would not get an email saying, oh, this guy ruined his life.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, absolutely. I have next question for Maurice. I would like to address you first, but the question is for all of you, don't you worry. In your experience as a trained gambling researcher, what are the character traits that consumers who fall victim to gambling harm share? And do you think the industry can work together to make sure that they do not exploit those, as you said, let's call it problematic areas, that the industry do not exploit those problematic areas? What I'm trying to say, in other words, what are the triggers that drive people to gamble to excess?
There are vulnerabilities. With every population, you will have some vulnerabilities. For example, we know that age is a factor. So the younger, that's why we see some regulators as well saying, under 25, they need to be treated differently, for example, or they need to have a more risk-averse approach when it comes to seeing their accounts. Some research does show that males are more prone, but I think that might change as well. And the lower socioeconomic status is a high issue. There's higher vulnerability to developing a gambling disorder. That doesn't mean that anyone is safe, because anyone can develop a gambling disorder. I think the markers of harm approach is always my favorite one, because you can see more behavioral detection. And then you can look into those demographics once someone is detected. So if you see someone who's canceling his withdrawals, he has declined deposits, he's playing long hours, you see chasing losses, and then you see that he's 20 years old, that would just like up to ante for you that you need to do more on that aspect. And then that's where the affordability comes in. I think it makes sense that if someone lives in a certain area, there's a higher chance that there might be a socioeconomic issue. So why not support? Obviously, it depends. But I think that can make, that would answer the question.
I think, Maris, you'll agree that there is no single profile that would fit. It's not a cookie cutter, who for players. I believe anyone can experience harm. Obviously, there are people who have an addictive character to start with. Obviously, they're acting impulsively, they act without thinking. Then there's obviously the cultural factor, the beliefs of a culture, basically. Like in Malta is very prevalent, I believe. There's luck, superstition, believing they can influence the outcome of a game, Then obviously there are the well-known states that affect these conditions, like escaping from a problem due to stress, whatever it may be, And obviously there's also isolation, turning to gambling just to fill, a void or avoiding loneliness. Naturally, also we have to remember that some people experience financial distress, so they might, because of mental illness as well, turn to gambling. We need to be aware of how to seek out, how to try and find out these markers of harm, I believe.
Exactly. it always gives you that hope. That's the problem with gambling. It will always give you that hope that like you're buying into a dream. So if you're financially, you really wish to, like you're trying to make your ends meet and it's really difficult, why not spend €2 on a lotto ticket? And at that point, you purchase that dream. What if I win?
Yes. Maurice, just to pick up on one of the points you said then about the markers of harm, which is obviously a really good way of finding out people who could potentially suffer from harm. You said about what do you think they should do if you notice sort of the example you gave where they may be playing long hours or middle of the night or I think when it's changing, that's a real key part, when their patterns of behavior change. And there might be a really good reason for that. For example, someone might be on holiday or change the shift pattern, but finding out that reason is crucial. What do you think the operator should try and do at that point as far as an interaction goes? And just to add the second part of that question, I'm really interested from your point of view is, are you at risk of just passing that player on to another operator? Because if you interact with them too much and they feel like they're under pressure, and I'm speaking from anecdotal stories from speaking to operators, they have a safer gambling conversation. The next thing they do is close their account down. We've not really helped that person there, which is the bit I can't get my head around, because all they'll do is open another account with somebody else. And it's just how we get around that, or any ideas around that.
The earlier the intervention, the higher chance of behavioral change. Yes. So if you have someone who's still showing the very early signs of at-risk gambling, there's a higher chance that they will change. This is comparing to someone who drinks 10 cups of coffee a day compared to someone who drinks 2. It will be much easier for the one who drinks 2 to switch to decaf, for example. And I think the interventions have to be real time as much as possible, but it's a huge challenge for a lot of the operators. And it should fit into the customer journey. We always see this as safer gambling messages being really bad, but it should be really fitting into the journey, similar to the airport issue.
Mhm.
Like you feel that you're actually proud. I've had conversations with customers where I would call them and I would conduct an RG call, and I've had customers who said, "Oh, wow, you do this." So there will always be that risk that they go somewhere else. I did hear it sometimes from operators saying it as an excuse. Why should we do it? Because they go somewhere else. But then you have the single customer view, and I think that would be a really great tool to have if potentially, and as well if you have markers of harm across all companies, then he would just get detected again. But
my view is it should be incorporated into that whole journey as well. Like you just said, it shouldn't be seen as a bolt on. It shouldn't be seen as, oh no, I've done something wrong, I've got a safer gambling message, which I think people do feel now. I think it should be part of the onboarding process. It should be the regular touch points, explaining about the systems and processes, making them feel really comfortable. So when maybe there are markers of harm that identify that individual, that conversation is almost second nature to them. It's something they've expected, they've seen before. And I think at the moment we're a bit away from that. I think it's a bolt on, almost like being told off at school that if you get a safer gambling conversation, you've done something wrong. And I think we've got to get away from that.
It depends on the approach that you take. Because I remember one case that really stuck to my head was like an RG call, but instead of asking the person, "Are you gambling?" within your means, it was more like, "Can you give us feedback on the tool that you just used?" So there was a level of empowering the person, and then we discuss certain things. As well, sometimes, for example, that's why I mentioned the cyber psychology aspect. Like you have jurisdictions where you have to set a time limit, but you don't have anywhere on the gambling website to understand how much time you spend. So sometimes bridging those gaps would actually make it, and the limit is a limit, it shouldn't, if you do a proper limit, you wouldn't be impacted, to be fair. It would be like a nice manner for you.
Okay, let's move on. We have 2 more questions, I guess, prepared. all of you use different approaches when addressing gambling harm and harm minimization. We can see that as we talk to each other. What do you think is your unique angle that you explore to bring a better change in the industry? Kevin, can we start with you?
Well, for the foundation for us, it is not particularly a unique take. We obviously seek to partner, as obviously David can attest as well, and even Mars. We always seek to partner. Obviously, due to our small size and our limited resources, we'll always seek to include other both local organizations who work within the field of uh, gambling RG and assisting problem gamblers. It is important that we include also international ones, like, we've been in contact with various organizations abroad who we are willing to partner, because obviously the same issues we face here in Malta, and they are faced abroad and everywhere, are essentially the same issues. We do not want to reinvent the wheel ourselves. We will get help from everywhere that we can possibly, and it is very important because we can share our best practices are shared in this industry, and we learn from other organizations as well. It's very important for us as a foundation. I'm speaking.
No, I thought you're doing next. I was gonna echo exactly what Kevin said. Actually, I think I learn more. Um, the more humble you are to learning and understanding from others, it's the way that you can actually define gambling related harm. And if you take an approach which is not just this is what I say and this is what it should be, it's more understanding from different aspects. My view on responsible gambling and gambling related harm nowadays is totally different than 3 years ago. So I think allowing that approach is by collaboration is what you need.
Yes, I agree totally. Obviously, operationally, it's beneficial for us to open ourselves up to local and especially international collaboration. I mean, as I said, sharing best practices and developing universal standards for RG. It's important, very important.
Yeah, I think from two perspectives. I've been in the industry for about 2.5 years now, so relatively new. And speaking to different people and having the time like this with Maurice and Kevin is fantastic. I feel like I get something from it every time. So
Yes.
things like this are very much about two-way learning for me. I love speaking to operators. I love speaking to people with a lived experience. Got lots of what I class as now friends who've got lived experience within the industry, and hearing their stories, and it's so impactful and really, really important. So from a personal point of view, I couldn't agree more. The collaboration, the talking to other people, and having humility while doing that is vital to make the industry a better place. From our Better Changes point of view, I'm really excited about what we do in the industry. We're very much around, we call it like working more upstream. So around the education, the awareness piece, and hopefully reducing the number of people who suffer from gambling related harm, but doing that very much from an operator point of view as well. How we can engage operators in that, rather than saying this is how you do it, telling people how to do things. It's working with operators. What's the pain points? What are they suffering from? How can we help them to actually improve their customer journey regarding safer gambling? We often talk about positive play. It's something which we're really passionate about. It's not something we've coined. It's been around for a long time, but we've really tried to talk about that agenda and believe that education is the way to actually move that needle a little bit. We spoke about it previously about the percentages, whatever you believe. I think the main aim, what everyone wants to do, is try and move the needle in the right direction. So the education around positive playing is something which we do, and I think that's possibly a little bit different to other organisations in our sector, if you like.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. To wrap up on hopefully a positive note, a last question for me. Do you believe that the future of responsible gambling and harm minimization is actually going to raise the standards and drive a noticeable change in the number of those who suffer from problem gambling. Maris, can you start?
I love how you said positive and you came to the most negative person on the call. Um, it's okay. No, I think there is positive change, not enough, and I think the more local regulation you see, the more generalization that you see, it will be better. I'm seeing things that I'm so happy about compared to before. So, for example, like in Sweden, where there's the P2B licensing to prevent certain like anti-spell pause website. So I see these things which are really making a big difference. And then you have organizations, such as Better Change and RGF that they weren't there years ago. So it's always good to see these things, and there's a more holistic approach towards safer gambling rather than these individuals across different bodies.
Kevin, what's your point of view?
I think there are several reasons to be optimistic about the future. I mean, ongoing efforts could lead to higher standards and a reduction in the number of people who are affected by gambling related harm. I mean, technology is obviously going to play a huge part in all this. We talk about AI and its advancements, and sometimes when researching this and seeing what is being done in the field of AI literally terrifies me, and I keep telling myself, how on earth, I mean, can't we come up with something that is effectively, helping people who are experiencing gambling-related harms, when you can, just feed something to an AI algorithm or something like that, machine learning, and you can actually write a whole book without lifting a finger. I mean, sometimes I surprise myself that we can't do something, beneficial for problem gamblers. Obviously there's regulatory changes that need to be, obviously governments are becoming more aware of the need for stricter regulation. And I think finally is that we must have the buy-in of the industry. Everyone has to do their part. They have to recognize that the long-term benefits of RG are there. It's no use in persisting in practices which are bad. Really, it doesn't pay. One has to accept that it's a long-term benefit ultimately of taking care of your customers.
Thank you. Dave, are you optimistic about the future?
Yes, I am. I think Maris was positive as well, even though she said she was negative. I think there was a lot of positivity there. I'm really positive about it because we've got conversations like this going on with people, and hopefully loads of people see this. And when people see this conversation, it's all right to disagree with what we've all said as well. It's fine, because that conversation carries on going, and through disagreement, you get innovation, and you get, oh, I don't agree with what Dave said there, but I think we could do this. That's exactly what we want to try and stimulate through discussions like this. We've got panels on, we've got either Clarion and ICE, what they do with the Consumer Protection Zone now, how that's grown over the last few years, the iGaming Next, the SBC, all the different events, Stigma, they've all got an element of player protection now, which is showing progression, it's showing positivity. And the other point, what makes me really positive, is that I don't think operators can risk going backwards now, for many reasons, licensing, fines, but also the main point from them is that they're not going to find the next generation of customers if they're seen to be an unethical, irresponsible operator. The new generation of people want to feel looked after. They want to be spoken to as individuals, as humans. And if an operator is not going to do that and look after their customer, regardless of the industry, it could be any industry in the world, people aren't going to use that now. As consumers, we've got a lot of choice now. And I think that we generally, us and the next generation, are going to choose people who look after them. So I think that operators, from a commercial point of view, will not allow regression in this. I think it can only go forward.
The bar has been raised, Dave. The bar has been truly raised.
That's a great end, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you. Great. We came to the end of our webinar. I've had, and you all had, the privilege of hearing from some of the great voices in the gambling industry, each offering their perspective on consumer care and gambling harm prevention. So thank you very much, Kevin, David, and Maris. The insights shared today have been great, both thought-provoking and inspiring, and just a little bit optimistic. So thank you once again very much.